Good evening all, and welcome. Happy almost Halloween. Tonight, we're going to recount horrors from Halloween's past. So I hope you're ready, because it's time to get comfortable. Get your treats ready, and let the darkness take control. This happened when I was 16. It was Halloween in my small town of South Louisiana. It was a crisp night. The temperature was in the mid-80s, and the heat showed no sign of slacking off. I was walking around with my older sister and our friend Brooke. My sister had gone as a cat, and Brooke had gone as a witch. I had made the awful decision of wearing a formal gown, since I decided to go as a zombie prom queen. I had a crown and everything. I was drowning in that dress though. It was so hot, and the corset back was restricting my breathing. It was around 8:40, and all of the kids were pretty much cleared out of the street. We were making our way to the park next to City Hall, where my mother was supposed to pick us up. We were supposed to be there for 9. The three of us were about 6 blocks away at this point, and my sister had stopped to talk to a friend of hers. I was not stopping though. It was close to time for my mum to pick us up, and I wasn't going to be late. I was also miserable in that stupid dress and wanted to go home. I had carried on for almost 2 blocks before I'd noticed that both my sister and her friend had stayed behind. I was annoyed, to say the least, but I only had 4 more blocks to go, and I could lay down in my mother's minivan. Being alone in the dark was starting to give me the creeps. The yellow streetlights didn't do the ambience any favors. I'd kept my pace and kept walking, until I heard the rumble of a muffler coming up behind me. I moved all the way off the road. The large black truck came past very quickly and turned to the left in front of me. I passed the intersection, and I only had 3 blocks left. Then I heard the truck again. I'd never moved back on the road, so I didn't bother looking back. It wasn't too strange that the same truck had passed again. The third time they passed, though, they slowed for a good 30 seconds or so, and that's what scared me. I didn't recognize the truck, and the windows were tinted heavily. As soon as I thought I could see a bit of a face, they peeled out and disappeared around a corner. I made another block before I heard the truck again. I was 2 blocks away from my ride, and I was scared and started running. I already couldn't breathe because of the dress, and was terrified I would pass out. As soon as I heard the truck, my stomach wrenched. I still kept going, only a good bit faster than I had been. I kept my eyes down and watched my own shadows as the headlights came closer. I heard the brakes, and I had made the decision to run. But I was too late. I realized how close they were to me. I felt a sharp pain on the back of my head, and I looked up the best I could to see an arm sticking out of the window. An eagle clutching a sword was tattooed on his upper forearm. He had my hair wrapped around his fist. Before I could really comprehend the situation, he pumped the gas and was dragging me alongside of his truck. I was running as best I could, clawing his arm, crying and screaming. The only thing that kept running through my mind was that if I tripped, I was going to be run over. This man was just laughing. I was completely helpless. As soon as it started, he let me go. I fell to my knees on the asphalt, tore my dress, skinned my palms, and my scalp was on fire. I was inconsolable, and I was hyperventilating. I stood up, wiped my face, then looked around and felt absolutely violated. I looked back at the way I'd come from and realized that this man had dragged me by my hair for a whole block and a half. Once I caught my head, I ran across the street to the park. My mother was nowhere to be seen. I climbed into the enclosed slide and just curled up and cried. I don't know how long I was lying there for before I heard my mother calling my name. I came out and she was walking up the street calling for me. I walked over to her and she looked me up and down and began freaking out. Apparently, I had blood on my face and dress from my hands. She ran to me and was asking me what happened and kept looking me up and down for a gash or something worse. I couldn't find my voice. I just held onto her and cried. We spent the next few hours at the police station filling out a report. Long story short, nothing ever came of it. My sister got into trouble with my parents for not being at the city hall on time. She was grounded. My mother had actually left City Hall to go and look for us. She found my sister where I left her, and my sister hadn't even realized that I never stayed. I got in trouble for not staying with my sister, but I didn't get grounded. I'm still pretty mad that the dress was ruined and I lost the damned crown. I'm even angrier that the man was never caught. This Halloween, I will be out with my godchild trick-or-treating. It'll be the first one that I've gone out for in the 9 years since it happened. It was a weekend in late October, and I was walking home alone from my friend's dorm on my college campus, Penn State. It was around 2:30 a.m. As I get closer towards my dorm, there's a patch that's not so lit up and is rather dark. I was proceeding to walk up the sidewalk, but a feeling of eeriness overcame me. All of a sudden, a shadow came from the bushes. I stopped and immediately froze. The dark, shadowy man said coaxingly, "Come here. I know you. Come here." He was gesturing me to come towards him. I then turned around and ran fast as hell up the road and screamed for my life. I looked back and the man was chasing after me. Luckily, there were people walking down the road and started running up towards the main road with me and told me to keep running. To my amazement, there happened to be a police car at the top of the hill. I gave the policeman all the information I had seen and knew of. Eventually, later on, they found a man with a rubber mallet. I had to identify the man, and the police told me he was a student. They also said the most they could do was file a student misconduct report with the university, because it was a he said, she said type of situation. They then just let him go walk free. I felt that there should have been more that they should have done. I was escorted to my dorm, but for days I was even afraid to leave my room in case he came back and recognized who I was. I could have been overreacting, but I was never so freaked out in my life. This kid was definitely an offie. The kids that helped me were super sweet. They stayed with me the entire time I talked to the police, and the girl invited me to stay over in her dorm if I felt uncomfortable to go back to mine. The last thing I wanted to do, though, was sleep in a complete stranger's dorm, but the gesture was appreciated and in the right place. I thanked them, and they seemed just as freaked out as me. I'm not sure if it was just some stupid Halloween prank to get a good scare in me, but I feared for my safety and that of others. I now carry pepper spray with me at all times on campus, and always remember to walk with a friend. The reality is, you never think this can happen to you until it does. I should have listened to my mum, when she always told me to never be alone and walk with someone. This happened back when I was in high school. At the time, I worked part-time at a grocery store. and it had become a tradition for a bunch of us to all go to some sort of haunt for Halloween. The first year we went to a haunted forest, and then haunted corn maze that began with me falling face first into a mud pile, and that was at the very beginning, and then included things like getting stuck in a shed-type building with a slew of Jason Voorhees characters, being chased by Leatherface, and other such funny things. It was fun. But anyway, it was our third year doing this. We were all headed to a haunted factory in a nearby city, and as this was before the advent of smartphones, we relied on printed directions. Because of the size of our group, we had to travel in 3 cars, and I was in the last car of the caravan with my co-workers Noel and Janie. Alas, we got lost because the people at the head of the group were terrible at navigation, and we ended up in a rough part of the city. At one point, we drove by a parking garage and I heard someone scream. Eventually, our car got separated from the rest of the group at a stoplight, and by the time it turned green again, we lost everyone. We drove around for a while, talking to each other on the phone and trying to find each other. I was in the back seat, talking to someone in the first car, Laura, and trying to direct my driver Noel, while Laura did the same with her husband who was driving their car. It was not going well. Eventually, I just said, "Noel, just pull over somewhere and let them come find us." Now, there were a lot of places Noel could have pulled over, like a Burger King or an office building parking lot. But he chose the parking lot of a shady bar. Why? I have no idea. Perhaps it was because there was a large key bank sign nearby, and that served as a good landmark for the others to find us. So we were waiting in this lot for the others, when a line of about 7 cars pulled into the bar. This wasn't so surprising, because it was a Friday night, but they didn't park normally. No, they surrounded us, the front end of the cars pointing towards us, and because of their closeness, there was no space for us to drive out of there. We were trapped. For a few minutes they just stared at us from their cars, and then they all started to walk out and come towards us en masse. There were at least 10 rough-looking guys, and by that point, I was convinced we were about to be robbed. "Get your wallet out," I told Noel and Janie. As I did the same. I didn't have much money anyway, to be honest, which worried me because I wondered what they would do if it wasn't enough. I was terrified, but was trying to keep calm, and Noel seemed genuinely not worried. But I can't believe he wasn't at least somewhat concerned, especially given his car contained both a teenager, me, and his girlfriend Janie. As for Janie, she was so scared that she was crying. The guy I presumed to be the leader reached the first door, approaching the passenger side where Janie and I were. He looked inside the car at us for a moment, and then he and his group all went back to their cars and parked normally. Well, I wasn't taking any chances and very sternly ordered Noel to go to the Burger King for God's sakes. We eventually grouped up with everyone else and made it to the factory, which was far less scarier than what we had endured. It maybe doesn't sound that scary, but it really genuinely was. I have a few theories. One, the guys got to the car and saw that we probably didn't have much to offer them and changed their minds about mugging us. However, this seems unlikely. Two is that they thought we were someone else until they reached the car and looked inside. Now that's definitely possible. And three, they were just messing with us. Whatever the reason, I was truly scared. And to this day, 13 years later, I regard the city with caution. This happened when I was 11. It was Halloween night, And to make things even better, this year it fell on a Friday. I was trick-or-treating with a friend of mine, Jane, and both her and her mum. Jane was dressed as a birthday present, and I was Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz. It was around 9 p.m, and Jane and I had collected a mountain of candy, to the point where our arms were beginning to hurt from carrying these heavy bags. During our trek, we came to a hill in our neighborhood where there aren't any houses until you get to the top. I was determined to increase my candy intake as fast as possible, so I sprinted to the top of the hill, leaving Jane and our parents behind. When I reached the top, I heard my mum yell for me to wait for them, but I was impatient, but I still did what I was told. About that time, a black car pulled up next to me. I think it was either a Volvo or Honda Civic, and a guy who looked to be in his late 20s to early 30s rolled down his window and said hello. He looked like the friendly type, so I happily said hello back. He asked, "Have you gotten a lot of candy tonight?" "Yup," and showed him my nearly overflowing bag. "That's awesome. Can you come here and give me some candy?" That's when I froze. My parents were the kind of people who drilled stranger danger warnings into your head, and this guy may not have looked like a creeper, but all the signs were there. At this point, I didn't really know what to do. I guess the guy saw my face because he motioned for me to come. "I just want a little candy, not the whole bag." I noticed someone in the passenger side lean forward to look at me too. Both of them had creepy smiles on their faces. I contemplated whether or not I should run, but it was lucky about that time my mother came running up the hill, having seen what was going on. The guys saw her too, faces turning white. "I gotta go," he said, staring at my mum the whole time, and floored the car down the road. My mum ran to me and I threw my arms around her. When Jane and her mum finally caught up, we all walked back to my house. My bag of candy was eventually able to take my mind off the situation, but I occasionally look back on this nowadays and can't help but wonder what would have happened to me if I'd have gone up to that guy's car. Thank goodness I was smart enough not to. When I was about 11 or 12, I was getting candy with friends on Halloween. It started getting pretty late, so we all decided to split up and go home. I was going down this one street that was really dark, and this dude comes out of his house as I was passing by, and I heard, "Hey, I could use your help." I'm usually always willing to help, and I didn't stop to think that maybe it isn't such a great idea to stop and help a complete random stranger in the dark. So I stopped and waited for him to approach me, and he came pretty close to me and said, "Can you please get in my car and start it for me while I look at the engine?" And he had this very strange look on his face. I ended up getting really bad vibes and said, I really gotta get home." I could barely finish my sentence before he said, "Oh, it's okay, you don't have to go home. I'm a nice guy and just need some help. Please, get in my car and help me. I'll give you a lot of candy for your help." I started backing away, and every time I stepped back, he stepped closer. My heart was racing. He didn't necessarily do anything bad at all, but it was just the way he was talking to me, and approaching me, and standing too close for comfort. I ended up just saying, "I really have to go home, I'm sorry," and began walking away really fast. And when I turned onto the next block, I ran very quickly. I still think about it all the time, because I'm not totally sure what his actual intentions were. Perhaps he genuinely needed help, but I had a feeling all over my body to just run. This encounter took place around 10 years ago, when I was 15 years old. I grew up in a place called Clondalkin, a small town outside of Dublin, Ireland. The town is very old. It had started as an old monastic settlement in the 6th or 7th century, and to this day still contains remnants of old buildings and infrastructures from that era. There's a huge park in the outskirts of town, which was frequented by many people daily due to its wide range of recreational facilities, such as fishing ponds, baseball fields, and playgrounds. It really is a beautiful park, and I'd spent many memorable summers and weekends just hanging out around there with friends. Like most old towns, however, Clondalkin was not without its urban legends. One such legend was about a section of the park known as the Devil's Passage. This legend stated that there was a particular location in the park that contained a cursed tree and featured a lot of satanic worship. I won't go into too much detail about the legend, but you can read it online, I'm sure. The origins of the legend are questionable at best, but having visited the supposed location, I can see exactly why such mystery surrounds the place. The Devil's Passage is partially enclosed by massive stone walls, creating a kind of courtyard feature, probably the remains of an old building. The last time I visited the location, it contained a large digger and piles of dirt, like it was undergoing some sort of construction. At the back wall of the enclosure, there was a small grove of trees that contained the alleged cursed tree. In reality, this tree was pretty weird looking. It appeared to be floating. The bottom of the tree was cut off, yet it was entwined amongst the branches of adjacent trees. Even though I always knew it was obviously not haunted or cursed, it still gave me the creeps regardless. Anyway, on Halloween of 2006, my two friends and I thought it would be fun to spend the night at the Devil's Passage, and we were very much into the paranormal, and we could think of no better place to spend Halloween. Looking back, it was a pretty stupid idea, as it was such a secluded area in such a large park at night when the whole city was out getting drunk and partying. After telling our parents we were going trick-or-treating, we headed to the park at 6 p.m, set up our spot at the very back of the grove within the Devil's Passage next to some boulders which we used as seats, and lit a fire with some old newspaper we found and sticks. Looking around at all the empty beer bottles, burnt wood and graffiti, it was clear that this place was a hotspot for underage drinking and debauchery. Thankfully, we were the only ones here on this particular night. Well, at least for the first few hours. After a short while spent sipping on beers that my friend had managed to steal from his dad and puffing on cigarettes, we were visited by a middle-aged man. All of us panicked and began stamping out the small fire we had going. As the man approached, we could see he was wearing a formal black suit with white gloves. This man clearly wasn't the park ranger trying to kick us out. He was a middle-aged man with grey hair and a goatee. We yelled hello over to him to see what he wanted. He just smiled and kept walking towards us. He told us not to worry, and that we weren't in any trouble. We asked him who he was and what he wanted from us. He then said he was throwing a bit of a party at the location tonight, and asked if we would like to stay for it. At first, my friends and I looked at each other with some sort of disbelief. Was he joking? This guy certainly didn't look like the partying type, especially not the type to host a party in a park on Halloween night. We told him it was probably best if we just head off, and that we were sorry to intrude on his spot. He kept insisting that we stay and he could offer us free booze and drugs. He even told us that there'd be girls coming and they would love to meet us, if you know what I mean. While his proposal began to entice my two friends, I was now starting to freak out. Why didn't my friends think it was weird for a middle-aged man inviting a bunch of 15-year-olds to a party in the woods? After a few minutes of him trying to convince us to stay, it all became way too intense for me, and I interrupted him saying we had to go. My friends looked at me puzzled. We might as well stay for a few more drinks, it's not even 9 yet. I reluctantly agreed, but told them I'd be leaving at 10 with or without them. The more time we spent there, the more unsettled I felt. The man, who called himself Stuart, started asking us really weird personal questions, like if we were virgins, or if we'd ever considered doing it with another guy, even if we'd be willing to participate in an orgy. There was something clearly wrong with this guy. He seemed normal at first, but the more he spoke, the more he revealed himself to be absolutely insane. I don't know what this guy was doing here, but he definitely wanted for us to stay for some kind of dodgy reason. He kept telling us that the other partygoers would be coming very shortly, and with plenty of alcohol and drugs, but no one ever arrived. It was as if he was stalling and trying to keep us there for as long as possible. Eventually, I grew tired of waiting around and wasting time with this creepy old git. I told my friends that I was leaving and that I'd see them later. As I began to walk away, Stuart became anxious. He practically begged me to stick around. At first he was polite, playful even, joking about how I was letting my friends down and that I would regret it if I didn't stay. When I refused again stubbornly, the threats started to come. My heart sank. He told me that he would kick the crap out of me if I tried to leave. His manner quickly changed from being friendly to downright aggressive. My friends, finally, started to back me up. They told the man that if he was going to be a dickhead, they were also leaving. That's when he took out a knife from inside his suit jacket and began brandishing it and saying that nobody was going anywhere. With a sudden surge of adrenaline, I picked up a big log from off the ground and whacked him across the head with it. I screamed at the top of my lungs for him to get the hell away from us and dragged my friends by the arm and started running as fast as I could out of there. He chased after a while, screaming about how his friends would intercept us on the way out and they'd catch us. He eventually gave up his pursuit, and we escaped unharmed. To this day I don't know who the guy was or what his motives were. So creepy suited guy in the park, let's never meet again. This one Halloween night in 2010, I just remember that I was older and participated in scaring the hell out of these kids. My dad is a huge Halloween freak. Every year we decorated the front porch like mad. Basically, it looked like a Halloween store puked in our yard. We had people hide in the bushes and ambush kids, that kind of thing too. And after the night was done, my dad and I would unplug everything and take things that could be stolen inside. We had this one Halloween prop that sat on a table on the front porch next to our laughing skull. It was a pretty decently sized seance ball with an old hag head in it. It was motion activated. No big deal, right? So of course it starts making the creepy noise and old hag starts talking when we walk by it to unplug it. We unplug it and it abruptly shuts off when we take it inside. We take down more stuff, and as I was right behind my dad, He walked by the seance head, and like magic, it starts making the creepy noise and talking again. Now this thing is unplugged. The plug is off to the side of the ball with no outlet around. So no, it was not powered and it wasn't battery operated. I seriously thought my dad was messing with me, but he looked just as confused as I was. When he bent down to check it out, it once again abruptly stopped. He picked it up just to see if the off switch was set, and it was. Is it possible for leftover power to turn things back on even when it's been unplugged for a while? I know that batteries can cause this, but this was an electrically powered unit by a plug. I'm sure there's a logical explanation for this. Isn't there? For context, I am 21 now. When I was 12, my family had just moved from the Midwest to a town in South Georgia. I was a 4'6", 85-pound, tiny homeschooled girl that had always grown up in suburbia and was now thrust into a small town with rampant crime and very heavy gang activity. My dad was deployed to Iraq at this time, so on Halloween night there was no adult to take my brothers and I trick-or-treating, because Mum was staying at the house to hand out candy. My older brother decided to stay home because he was 14 and too old to trick-or-treat. Well, growing up in a mostly organic and sugar-free household, I sure as hell wasn't gonna let that stop me from getting my annual sugar binge, and so I set out with my 8-year-old brother to trick-or-treat in our neighborhood. It was a very small neighborhood, well lit by streetlights and full of people walking around, so my mum was fine with us going and told us to be back soon. We started making our rounds. I was dressed as a chef, and my little brother was wearing a fluffy lion costume like the one in The Wizard of Oz. We went down our street and the one next to it, and then turned to walk down the way that would take us in a circle back to the house. Then something felt off all of a sudden. The streetlights were all out on this street, and I started feeling uneasy. It was so still and quiet, and none of the houses had their porch lights on, and there were no people trick-or-treating, which is strange, considering it was only 8:30 p.m. I kept walking tentatively, my little brother just bouncing along happily beside me with his bag of candy. In the dark, I'm suddenly able to make out a tall figure about 15 feet down the street, sitting on one of those metal cubes that hold electric stuff that all our neighborhoods seem to have. He was sitting extremely still, not looking at us, but staring straight ahead of him, looking like he was trying not to move. He was wearing a black hoodie, with the hood pulled up and cinched tight around his face. Well, my big sister instincts kicked in, and I just grabbed my brother's hand, slowed down my steps, and tried to inconspicuously say, "John, slowly turn around and start walking that other way, but don't say anything." Being the loud kid he always had been, he said, "What?" in a piercingly loud baby voice. I just said, "Turn around," through clenched teeth, and then pull him by his hand, and started to walk back down the direction we came in as casually as I could. All of a sudden, the figure jumps up and starts sprinting at us, yelling angrily. I don't remember exactly what he said, but it was something to the effect of, "You little twats, get back here." We ran for our lives, and I still don't know if I ever have run so fast. My heart was racing, and my little brother was lagging behind, and I could still see and hear the man running after us. We booked it around the corner to the first house we saw, and burst into the garage, where a nice old man was handing out candy. We clearly startled him. He looked like a nice old grandpa, and I started blurting out what had just happened very loudly and maniacally. He calmed us down and offered to walk us back over to our house. Before we left, 2 kids who were sitting in the garage with him walked over to us. They were about our age, and I assume were his grandchildren. They handed us their pillowcases full of candy and told us to take them because they already had a lot and we needed it more than them because we weren't going to trick or treat anymore. To this day, it was one of the most striking and generous unprovoked acts of kindness by children I have ever experienced. I said thank you, and the friendly grandpa walked us home and told our mum what happened. She thanked him profusely and gave him a hug, and we went inside to eat candy safe and sound. I'm really grateful for that old man and his family. I was 14 at the time, and was, and still am, awkward. I like to avoid confrontation, so I say as little as possible to offend someone to make them upset with me. At the time, I was at a stupid Halloween party that was basically for adults and young 6 to 10-year-old kids, so I was extremely bored, and my mum said I was too old to trick or treat, so I just walked along with the group of adults and young kids in my costume. At one point, this 16-year-old guy was introducing me as being the oldest children of one of my mums in the group. You could tell by the way he talked and acted that there was something off with him, but I thought it was great that there was someone closer to my age, so I ignored it. My mum suggested we split off from the group to hang out, as she's a very lenient parent, and I had a phone, so I agreed. Him and I were walking around the neighborhood as he went door to door awkwardly asking for candy, as I stood on the sidewalk as I couldn't ask. At one point during the night, I noticed something was really off with him. He started asking me if I believed in vampires. I said yes because I was worried what his reaction would be if I said no. His eyes lit up, and he started talking about him being a vampire, and asked if I wanted to go back to his house so that he could bite and suck on my neck. I nervously laughed and said, "Oh no, I'm sorry. I have a boyfriend," and he wouldn't be comfortable with that. He replied with, "Oh, I have a girlfriend, but she wouldn't mind. It's just sucking your neck because my fangs get sore when I don't. Just come over." I knew he lived in the neighborhood because everyone in the group did, other than my family, so I didn't know how to say no. I kept politely declining as the sun was almost completely down, so it was getting dark, and I was getting scared from his persistence and being alone with him. So I started blowing up my mum's phone with calls and trying not to cry. She wasn't answering, so we wandered along the huge neighborhood and by the grace of God ran into the original group. I ran to my mum and hugged her for a while, crying and being mad at her for not answering because she left her phone at the house. It may not sound that creepy, but this guy was so persistent and basically begging me to let him suck my neck when I was alone with him. For the past 16 years, I've lived in a very standard house on a very average street in a big, boring neighborhood. In the daytime it's quiet. There aren't very many kids anymore, just empty nesters or the elderly. However, not very many kids meant that there are still some, and so when Halloween comes around, I still go all out. The pumpkins, the fake spider webs, the blinding strobe lights, all of it. Then I sit on the bee porch, dressed as a spooky witch, and wait. Now every single year, mostly back in my trick-or-treating days, I can recall a certain strangeness. There is, without fail, a man that walks the night silently dressed as none other than Michael Myers. as in the Halloween slasher Michael Myers. Pretty harmless. It is Halloween. It is scary. He never says a word, just walks silently with a long knife that glints as it catches the street lamps. This year I'm sitting in the dark on my porch. It's 2 hours in, and I've had a staggering total of 5 kids come through, and was about to give up. Behold, Michael Myers makes his appearance. Quietly, he walks past my house. I'm thinking, dang, my porch light is off, he won't see me. But in that moment, he stops mid-stride and turns towards me, and freezes. For what felt like ages, he stared at me in the dark, totally alone. Then, he twitches his head and resumes his walk. The worst part is that no one else seemed to have ever noticed this guy. Neither of my 2 brothers, not my best friend, and no one. For 16 years, I've been the only one to see him. He's good. I'm not one to believe in paranormal or spirits, but this happened and I don't know how to explain it. I was walking with my friend Dale trick-or-treating, as well as some kids that were my mum's friends' kids. We were walking near a small bridge to get to an island known as Seabrook Island. It's a small neighborhood, but high middle class, and I know the area like the back of my hand. As we're approaching the bridge, we hear one of the other kids scream. We turn around, and in an instant, the kids were gone. The decoration and the whole surrounding area had all their lights turned out. It was as if in an instant, we were warped into a different dimension. We shouted to see where the kids went, but there wasn't a soul in sight. Feeling anxious, we started running around. The neighborhood didn't look like itself, and eventually, we reached a park with a green ladder and metal slide on a concrete floor. As I mentioned, I know this area extremely well, and as far as I know, this park does not exist. We kept leaving the park, but no matter how or where we went, we always ended up winding back here. It was after a while that we realized we had our phones with us. I pulled mine out, but my contacts were blank. What the hell is going on? I punched in my mum's number manually, and right as I went to hit the call button, the phone turned off. I was getting extremely scared. There was nothing I could do. We walked around, and eventually led back to the park. A man was there, and we asked him desperately to make a call on our behalf to my mother, because we were lost, scared, and frightened. The man, however, gave no useful reply. He was speaking gibberish, or at least it was gibberish to me. I don't know which language it was. And when he showed me his phone screen, after painstakingly communicating with hand gestures that we needed to ring someone, I saw that his phone screen was cracked and unresponsive to the touch. So effectively, useless. And it just displayed the time with a black screen. Great. We left the man and continued trying to find our way out. After what felt like forever, something happened and I felt my phone turn on in my pocket. I looked down and it was 12:01. And just like that, we suddenly recognized the neighborhood we were in. Lights were illuminating houses, and we quickly made our way back to my house. It was very late. I wondered what had happened to the other kids, but I was sure they made their way home safely. Dale went back to his house, and I to my own. I threw myself into bed and passed out. In the morning I woke up, and Dale was on the floor, asleep. This has been a very confusing night. I'm not sure what's caused this, but it has creeped me out beyond measure. My best friend at the time, my brother, his friends, and my friend's boyfriend all went out to our local abandoned house, which we call Witch's Circle, to go ghost hunting. Now, this little abandoned house is actually in a national park called Little Basin Creek Reserve, but there's actually a story behind this house, which I don't know how much of it I believe, but it is said that on Halloween night in the 50s, two guys brought their girlfriends out for a sacrifice. I've gone to the archives and done tons of research, but I can't find anything to verify this information. This Halloween, when we went out there, we were the only cars out there. You have to drive past town a little ways and head out a dirt road to get there, and there's only one spot for parking, so we would be able to see if others were there. As we were making our way down the trail to the house, I'm holding my best friend's hand. We start walking under a tree while the entire time I'm staring at the house and not paying attention to my surroundings like I should be in a dark wooded area. A small branch from the tree that we're all walking under at the time falls and lands horizontally at my feet. I didn't see it happen, but my friend and brother did. They stopped me and looked before stepping over the severed branch. I should have taken it as a warning and not kept going, but I did. As we got further from the entrance, we all stood talking quietly amongst ourselves, and then we all heard a very high-pitched scream coming from the backyard of the house. We stopped in our tracks, and I ran back towards the car. I've never been more terrified in my life. It's a sound that I will never be able to erase from my memory. That high-pitched death scream. There's no way I can debunk this, as we were the only ones out there, and it definitely wasn't the sound of an animal, especially because it sounded like a human woman. I haven't been back there since. I live in an old, tiny, 3-bedroom house in an indigenous community/reservation. After my parents gave me this old house, I asked fiancé and his stepbrother to move in with me to help with the cost. My fiancé and their stepbrother, without fail, every day to my annoyance, would lock the doors and windows to the house. Every single one. My family has lived in that house since it was built in the early 60s, and no one has ever locked the back door until now. Eventually, I adapted and began locking the windows and doors before bed as part of our household bedtime routine. We became a little family, with our 2 fat cats and a round husky puppy. Halloween rolls around. It was uneventful. We handed out candy, watched movies, and we all had work the next day. So after doing the window/door check, fiancé and I go to our room with the puppy. Stepbrother goes into his room with the cats, and everything is completely normal within our routine. The puppy was 6 months old and very large. He'd always sleep beside our bed on the floor. In the middle of the night at around 3 a.m, the puppy starts crying. Fiancé woke up first, since that was his side of the bed, and got up to take the puppy for a pee. They come back in, but the puppy keeps crying, and these aren't soft little doggo whimpers. They were getting louder and more panicked as time went on. So I get up and offer to take the puppy out again. My fiancé grumpily says no, and the puppy stops whining and runs off into the living room. We could hear him hop on the old sofa, and with the house falling quiet again, we drift back to sleep. 20 minutes later, we're awoken to the sound of the puppy screaming. It literally sounded like someone was beating it. My fiancé and stepbrother both ran into the living room and found the puppy hiding underneath our coffee table, cowering and screaming as if someone were whipping him. The guys do their door and window checks and everything was good. They put away their late-night weapons of choice, and that was that. Well, over coffee the next day at breakfast, we began talking about what happened. His stepbrother tells me that he woke up shortly before we did, and had heard when the puppy had started whining. He woke up because he heard someone stomping through the house. He implied our arguing had woken him up, and that my fiance's stomping and slamming doors wasn't cool, and likely what caused the puppy to freak out. We gave him a weird look, and explained we weren't even awake at the time, and after some questioning, he said like someone sounded like they were wearing work boots and digging around the kitchen. No explanation for that one. The neighborhood that I lived in was super kid-friendly. There were lots of families outside in the afternoon to just chat and let the kids out of the house. Our neighborhood was really safe, so many times our parents would just leave us outside with the neighbors' kids, so no adults would be watching us but like the older kids. It had been like that until the summer before I was going to be a 6th grader. My friend and I were playing outside at around 3 to 4 p.m. and many people were not out yet, so it was just us. Okay, basically, she was the eldest. She was in 7th grade, and the rest of us were kindergartners, 2nd grade, so she had to look after us. This was the first encounter with the man in the green car. We noticed that this car kept circling the neighborhood, and then there was a big golden car that was parked right next to in front of where we were all going to be hanging out, and he basically double parked next to it so that we wouldn't be able to see him, but he would still be able to see us. My friend's grandma came out to check on us, and she noticed the car but didn't give it much thought. A few minutes passed and she came back out to check on us and was pouring water into the sewage, and she saw the man and told us to get into the house. She even told me not to go home even though I lived next door, and just rushed me inside. I was scared. She told me not to go home yet and to stay there until my grandma picked me up. The man was watching us. She'd never seen him before, and everyone in our neighborhood knew each other. It's uncommon to see someone new. At first, though, she thought that he was just picking up someone, but it was way too long, and he was just creepily watching us. So she locked the doors, and my friend and I decided to take a peep through the window. The car waited for a few minutes, then came back after another few, and finally left. My friend and I were seriously worried, but after a while forgot about it and went to play in her basement. The next day everyone was outside. It was sunny and windy. All the kids were out, even the older kids, and the green car returned. This time I saw his face. He looked Asian, was mid-30s with long hair, and he had this glare. Every time I saw him, he was staring directly at me. I was so scared. I told my grandma and she told me not to worry because there were lots of people outside. I told her he was there yesterday too, and that's when she was like, "What the hell?" And she was going to confront him. But I told her not to because he seems like a psycho when she could barely walk. Plus, there were people outside who were suspicious of this dude as well, so we all just went back home. This happened several times. I don't remember a lot of things because it's been years. The guy never really did anything, but stare at us for hours. But the thing that stuck with me was that he was always in a disguise. Like he would always try to change some part of it so that we wouldn't notice it was him. For example, he would show up with a fake mustache. The last time I saw him was actually when I was walking to a Halloween party with my sister. The thing was, I was telling her this story about the man in the green car who kept stalking me. And what do you know? The green car pulled up and parked right next to the sidewalk where I was crossing the street. I told my sister that that was the car and the guy and got goosebumps. But that was the last time, unless he got a new car or something. Anyway, it's a repressed memory, and thinking back on it, every time I think of him, I can still feel the glare from his eyes. I really hope to never meet that creep again. It was this past Halloween, and I went out to this mall with some friends after school. We were a group of 8 senior guys, but we decided to go trick-or-treating for the last time before it became questionable. Hell, it's even more questionable now, seeing 6-foot guys walking around in pirate costumes. But hey, we might as well have some fun, right? We went into the mall to find it empty for a bit, and sooner the mall got more and more full with mums and their kids trick-or-treating the different stores. Before we left, we all got a quick bite to eat from the food court before we went to trick-or-treat. Our plan of going about Halloween was not traditional though. In a nutshell, we would be in my friend's car and would be driving up and down neighborhoods with the take one bowls and dumping them in pillowcases or trash bags before we left. We were on our way to the exit when I had the massive urge to take a dump. After I ate some tacos from Taco Bell, and I don't know how I didn't expect this coming. I told them to go ahead and that I would catch them up. I was starting to sweat from the urge, and I went pretty deep into the mall to find a restroom, finding the sign that said restrooms in a long, white hallway. Now without thinking, I ran into the first restroom, and saw and went straight to the stalls. I remember feeling relief as I went and sat down ready to do my business. Right before I was about to, however, I heard this old raspy voice. "Son, I think you're in the wrong restroom." I froze and let out a choke. "What?" The old and raspy voice showed who she was as she bent down to tell me. "You're in the girls' restroom, son." She let out some sort of twisted giggle, and I remember his face clearly. Old and wrinkled, white tanned skin, white hair and round framed glasses, with psychotic, huge eyes. I was frozen, in complete shock and horror, as I sat there looking at this man who was in the girls' restroom for God knows why. We both stared at each other for God knows how long. The old man broke the awkward silence by saying, "You know what? I'm gonna pay you a visit." He had this long ear-to-ear grin with only his lips and was beginning to cackle more, showing his brown, rotted teeth. At that moment I knew it was the time to get out of there. All I remember before I took off was seeing him start to crawl under the stool to me. I sat up, not even zipping my pants or putting my belt on, just pulling them up and running. I dashed out of there as fast as I could, looking like I had just crapped myself as I was running out of the hallway. I looked back and saw the old man had started sprint walking. He was about 6'3" and wearing an olive khaki jacket with black stained pants and construction boots. I kept booking it until I was out of that mall. I see my friends in their car waiting on me, and I ran up to my friend's car and I was shaking as I was putting my seatbelt on. He asked me what was wrong, and I told him in a stern voice to start the car. My friend Skylar was next to me asking me why, but I cut him off and raised my voice. "Box, we gotta go now." He started the car and signaled the rest of our friends group to follow up. We drove out of there, and I didn't look back. I have had some other strange encounters with people, some weirder than others, but I never thought that one of these days I would find myself in the position of being face to face with a deranged person in a restroom. I haven't seen him since, not that I would want to. I just pray that he left the mall as soon as I did. But what still keeps me up at night, however, is why. Why was he in the girls' restroom in the first place? This encounter took place on Halloween of 2010. I was a sophomore in high school, not really at the age to go full out partying, and not really the age where I wanted to sit at home with my parents all night handing out candy because I was too old to trick or treat. That day at school, a group of 5 or 6 friends and I decided to make plans to roam around the city, wreaking havoc, doing typical 16-year-old Halloween stuff. It started out pretty chill. We all got ready and dressed up in our costumes. I didn't have one planned out, but I was a bit eccentric at the time, so I winged it. I wore some purple plants, a rainbow bandana, hippie style, and every other colourful accessory you can imagine. Ultimately, I was a rainbow. During our first adventure, we went to Target to walk around and show off all of our costumes. I remember distinctly this lady walked up to us and told us all this crazy stuff. We talked to her about how we were going to play with my Ouija board, tarot card, and pendulums, as I used to be super into all of that, and her mood instantly changed from friendly to taken aback, almost as if she wanted to run away. She told us she had a twin sister and felt very strange. She told us not to mess with the unknown because her sister was psychic and just knew things. Didn't think much of the encounter with the random stranger on Halloween night at Target. We did play with the Ouija board, but we neither got possessed nor had a creepy encounter with a demon. That is when the encounter comes into play. It was dark. We were bored. 5 of us were in my small room when my parents were home. We had more of a chance getting some excitement by walking around the neighborhood on Halloween than sitting in my room playing board games. We walked around and even tricked or treated a little bit. It was a lot of fun until we passed a large, dimly lit vacant parking lot. It was vacant, all but one van that was situated facing towards the street. This time, I got bad vibes as we walked by. Just as we were passing, the window rolled down. Some of us looked back, and some of us kept walking. I stopped and looked back, but it was so dark that all I could see was a faint glow of a cigarette. For some reason, what she said will stick with me forever. She said in a deep, raspy voice, "Hey kids, wanna come here and get some candy? I don't get a lot of kids where I'm from." Luckily, I was close enough to home at this point, where I could have gotten there quickly if I needed to, and that's exactly what we all did. I'm really against judging people, but I also like to look out for myself and my friends. Maybe it was just an innocent old lady wanting to hand out candy, but at that point I trusted my instincts and booked it all the way home. Better safe than sorry. I am a short female and love Halloween. I love to dress up to be scary and scaring people and watch them when they realize what happened and start to laugh. The fun kind of scaring, especially with the older kids. So I usually end up helping at haunted houses or at other friends' places, scaring older kids coming up to get candy or going through their houses. This was some years ago that it happened, and I was helping make some of the new props for a haunted house that a family had, and since it's a large production, the ones who were helping usually go down there a week ahead and camp out on the large farm. Now it's a large piece of land in the country, which is where we have the party part of the haunted house, and then the actual haunted house, which is a house that the owner lives in and then starts dressing up for Halloween along with her family and friends. And then the people around the town come to enjoy it. It's got a long drive out to the house surrounded by woods. During Halloween, Since I'm quite good at sewing and making stuffed toys, I make some stuffed props. That year they wanted a stuffed Slender Man to stand in the haunted house that people could run into. Slender Man is one of my favorite modern day made monsters, so I offer to make the prop. I also know that some company made those full body suits that had Slender Man morph suits, and I decided I could be semi-lazy and order the Slender Man morph suit and just stuff it, because let's face it, making a full body stuffing is hard and takes a lot of time to do with only a month to do it in. I got the morph suit, stuffed it, and made a very large stuffed Slender Man, and was quite proud of him. He was at least 6 foot. Can you imagine how hard it is to work stretchy spandex fabric into the shape of a humanoid without it fighting you? I had to use some really stiff stuffing and a few other tricks to keep its proper shape. I didn't want to mess it up, so I sat him in my passenger seat, which of course got a few looks on the road. But that's not the story. I got to the house and everyone commented on how good he looked, and I set up my tent. I have a tent that's set up for 1 person, or maybe 2 small people, but since I'm short and wide, it fitted me, myself, perfectly. After I'd set up the tent, lay mat and sleeping bag and pillow, I noticed I'd forgotten my body pillow at home. I sleep on my side, so I sleep with a body pillow to help me sleep better aligned and not be a bag of achy bones and joints in the morning. It was too late to get it from home, as this was an hour away, and I didn't like driving at night. So jokingly, one of my friends said, "Why don't you sleep with the stuffed Slender Man?" Now it seemed weird, but darn it, I hate waking up hurting all over because I slept badly, especially being in a tent on hard ground, even with a lay mat and sleeping bag. So it wasn't that bad of an idea, and of course everyone thought it was hilarious, and I went to the tent dragging my stuffed, large Slender Man in there with me. I looked like some dog with a huge stuffed toy, trying to get it through my doggy door. Silly as hell, but because Slender Man was soft and stiff enough so that I could use him as a decent body pillow for the night, I thought screw it. I told you about my small tent for 2 reasons. One, so that you can understand why I had to half sit up Slender Man since he was way too long to fit the dimensions of the tent, which made me have to pretty much sleep with my body wrapped around his belly and legs. Yes, I looked like I was sleeping on Slender Man's lap. And yes, to most people who knew it was there, it looked ridiculous. A friend even took a picture of it. And for the second reason, is so that you could understand that I was in the tent by myself. Now the tents were near each other of course, and if the weather whips up, we can escape to the house, but we do the camp out because it's fun, and you can guess there's a lot of people, so it can get cramped in the house if we slept there. The families and close friends usually bunk together, but I'm the type that needs to have my own space. I have autism and anxiety problems, and after a certain amount of time with people I need some space to decompress from being around others. Otherwise I can have a bad breakdown and it's not pleasant for anyone. I was near the larger tent of my friend and her kids, and I unzip my tent and wrap up around Slendy and pass out. I wake up to the sound of a man screaming in horror, not from another tent but right in front of me. I wear glasses, so all I could see was this blurry figure that was now screaming about monsters and running away from my open tent flap. The screams of this man of course woke me and everyone else up, and some of the guys with us managed to catch and tackle him and hold him down while the police were called. I was of course in shock, as this scraggly, thin, wild-looking man continues to scream and cry like a maniac, and thrash around screaming about monsters coming to get him and whatnot. The police came out, and apparently this guy was a druggie that was high off his rockers, and had seen the tents and broke into mine because it was the smallest. Because he was high and tripping, seeing the stuffed Slender Man in his mind made him think it was the real deal, sitting there waiting to attack him, which is why he began losing his mind. While in retrospect this was funny, I was damn frightened at the time, despite the fact the guy had been taken by the police, and I shoved Slender Man into my friend's tent and hid in the corner of her tent for the rest of the night, unable to sleep. For the rest of the time I was there, I drove back home as soon as it started getting dark, until the haunted house was open, and then I'd drive home in the middle of the night. Slender Man went on to scare a ton of kids and friends that came to the haunted house. He was a hit, but sadly lost one of his legs to a very naughty chocolate Labrador of one of the haunted house owners, and had to be disassembled. Though I hope one day to remake him again, once I figure out how to fix his leg properly. This happened back in elementary school. I was around 7 or 8. I haven't thought about it too much in the past years, but listening to other stories has reminded me. However, at school there was the annual Halloween party, where brothers and sisters of my elementary school mates were invited. We've always had lots of fun, whether it be eating spooky snacks, wearing costumes and stuff. And my best friend Sarah had a strange costume at the time that involved fake plastic chains, but seemed very real as it was quite heavy. But on to the story. Sarah tells me she had to go to the bathroom, so we both head to the bathroom. I wait for her outside the entrance of the toilet, and another couple of girls go into the bathroom as well, but I don't pay any attention to that. A few minutes go by and I start getting annoyed because I didn't want to miss out on the party. At least 10 minutes go by and I was pissed. I turn around and enter the bathroom. I hear the sound of her chains moving around, but can't tell from which stall it's coming from. I knock on every door and get no reply. I get on the ground and look through the spot between the doors to the floor in order to ascertain where the noise is coming from, and I find it. Strangely, I see she isn't alone in the bathroom. I raise my voice and ask if she's okay, and who was that girl? There's no reply. I start trying to open the door, as we couldn't lock the doors, so someone had to keep it closed. I'm now panicking and screaming, and after I try with all the force of a 7-year-old, I open it slightly. I see a girl. I knew her. She was the teenage sister of one of my classmates. I ask her what's going on, and she says that Sarah's having some problems and she was helping her. But I couldn't hear Sarah anymore. I kicked her ankle and get into the bathroom. I was scared as hell and just wanted my friend back. As I get into the bathroom, she closes it again using the back of her leg. I look at Sarah, and she was sitting on the toilet, her face red, with the chains suffocating her. I began to scream, and that girl slapped me. I was sobbing and crying, and wasn't able to move from the fear. So I began screaming as loudly as possible, and a teacher finally arrives and gets me and Sarah out of there. They call her parents, and the ambulance, and my parents bring me home while Sarah goes to the hospital. Turns out that her brother, our classmate, was pissed off by her, and his sister decided to do something about it. I still get chills thinking about what happened, but I've never seen the cops talking to my parents or at school, so I guess they got away with it. Me and Sarah never spoke about it again, and when I tried to ask her what happened, she just doesn't want to talk about it. I don't blame her. Yesterday, I had a weird experience on Halloween night, so I wanted to share it. In 2015, my mum passed away from cancer. Since her death, we made a family tradition to visit her grave every Halloween night to memorialize her. We would go to worship in the church and then light a candle on her grave. This year the church was closed and my brother was sick, so me and my dad decided to visit her grave alone. We drove out at 9 p.m. The graveyard was completely dark, no lights on the graves. But then we got over to my mum's grave. The lights were lit. We knew it was my grandma who had visited her and lit the candles. We sadly lost contact to her after my mum's death. We lit up our own candles and looked at her grave in silence. I felt comfort watching her grave. I wasn't scared, but it was sad to see all the other graves with no lights. I was surprised the candles didn't blow out, as it was a windy night and they were out in the open. Suddenly, I heard a quiet sound coming from my side. It was completely dark, so I couldn't see anything. But after hearing the sound the second time, I could hear it was a cat. I just sat down on the ground, trying to find the cat so that I could hear if it was close to me. My dad watched. He knew I loved cats, so he wasn't surprised I wanted to pet it. The cat was very happy and wanted to be petted, so I began to give him some attention, and then he crawled into my lap. I just sat in silence with the cat watching the grave. My mum loved cats too. She loved our cat at home. He sat in her bed looking out for her to the end. Then my dad said that maybe it was a cat my mum had sent to tell us it would all be okay. The moment was beautiful. My dad turned on the flashlight and his phone to see that it was a black cat. A black cat on Halloween night, visiting my mum's grave. I continued to pet him on my lap, and after a while he crawled out of it. But then the cat walked over to my mum's grave, crawled over the little fence, and then just stood on the grave, the exact place her urn was buried. The cat turned around and looked at us both, and I could feel my mother's presence as I looked into its eyes. And even though I didn't believe in the afterlife, this felt so real, almost as if it were a sign from my mum. After standing there for a while talking about memories with my mother, we went home, but the cat followed us as we walked away. I sat down to stroke him one final time as it crawled into my lap again. My dad continued to walk to the car. He thought I was right behind him, but I couldn't let go of the cat. I just felt a connection. It was so warm, so happy, and I started to cry. I haven't cried a lot over my mum, and I don't know why, but it was at this moment that I couldn't contain myself. It was like the cat was connected in some way to her. I hugged it tightly, gave it a kiss on the nose, and my dad realized I wasn't behind him at that point and came back for me. He heard me crying and came back to comfort me. He knew I wasn't ready to let go of the cat, but he took my hand and we went to the car. I knew I couldn't stay there forever. I am glad I had the experience, because it felt comforting and beautiful. This isn't the first time I got a sign from her like this, but I want to know what other people thought of the experience. Thanks for listening. This happened on Halloween. I was going as Charmeleon this year. It was hot in Texas, but I enjoy the heat and it really didn't bother me. My dad had taken me trick-or-treating around our suburban neighborhood that night. These houses were known for giving out the best candy and having the coolest costumes. I knew them as the scary houses. Being the wimp that I was, I kept my head down and tried to scurry past them, knowing that they wanted to scare me. When I had walked far enough, I turned around to see my dad laughing. "You can come back, sweetie, it's okay," he said. Everyone was looking at me. Then I noticed a guy standing behind my dad. He didn't have any skin, he was all muscle, dripping blood all over the concrete. It was Halloween, so I thought it was a costume. Then he walked through my dad, like a ghost floating through a wall as if he wasn't there. My dad looked confused as he saw my face twist into pure horror. I quickly turned and ran as fast as my little legs would carry me. In cliché fashion, I tripped as I was running. I shoveled my candy back into my bucket along with the dirt and grass from a neighbor's yard, and then I got on my feet and bolted to my house. When I got home, I locked every single door and window and began crying. My poor father was still outside, and I remember talking to my mum and her calming me down after that. When I mentioned it to him, he said he hadn't seen anything and genuinely looked concerned. I never saw the skinned man again, but it still terrifies me to this day. Hey guys, it's Mort here and thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this extra long Halloween special. If you did, don't forget to show this video some love. Like, comment, subscribe, and press the bell icon if you haven't done so already. By the way, also a huge thank you to all my amazing patrons, whose names can be seen on screen now. If you're interested in becoming a patron, now is probably a good time. With loads of exclusive content over there, as well as heaps of other rewards, feel free to check it out. It's at the top of the description, right where you would expect. I've narrated a pretty cool creepypasta over there, actually a few, and if you want to listen, they're waiting for you. Maybe I'll release them on YouTube later on, but they're exclusives for now. In any case, I really did hope that you enjoyed tonight's video. I love Halloween, it's the best time of year, and it's especially special because it was Pandora's first, and we had a really, really nice time. But for now, I'm gonna sign off. Stay awesome, happy Halloween, and I'll see you in the next one.